Jim Cathcart, CSP CPAE, is the author of 16 books, including the international bestsellers The Acorn Principle and Relationship Selling. He has delivered over 3,000 professional speeches around the world over the past 39 years and was recently inducted into the Sales and Marketing Hall of Fame at a ceremony in London. His motto is helping people grow, and he's been doing that in his own life too. He's a mountain trail runner, professional singer-songwriter, a motorcycle enthusiast, and most of all, a business motivator who coaches companies to grow their people and their profits. Welcome, Jim.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Gail.
Well, I know Jim personally, so I have to say that I know he really does all these things. And as a matter of fact, weren't you just in China?
I just got back 2 nights ago.
So tell us about what you did there and what it was like.
Oh, what a thrill. I did a nationwide speaking tour. And when you say nationwide and the word China in the same paragraph, you're talking substantial. They have 25 cities with over 1 million population.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was in Shanghai, Chengdu, Guangzhou, and then briefly in Beijing. And unlike what I expected, it's not a congested mess. It's not, 8 million bicycles and cars fighting for an opportunity to get down the street. There are big, sweeping, glorious boulevards in the main cities and beautiful buildings and gorgeous parks and landscapes. And man, I mean, I was overwhelmed. It's far beyond anything I ever expected. And I was there on a speaking tour doing 6-hour seminar days in a number of cities for 1,000 people each.
Wow. Well, I was going to ask you what you spoke on there.
Well, I spoke on leadership and success generally, but specifically got into public speaking techniques in one of the seminars, relationship selling ideas and strategies in another one. And gosh, what an eager audience. I mean, they were just voracious. Everybody wanted to learn. They were all taking notes, taking cell phone photographs of my slides, because I had an interpreter standing right beside me, and I would have to speak for a minute and then pause while he caught up. And then the audience would get it. And he and I figured out how to get our timing just right by the second one so that I could deliver a punchline and get a laugh at the appropriate moment.
I was going to ask you, how did that go with an interpreter? Sometimes there is a delayed reaction. So, but I think it's interesting because countries other than ours are voracious as far as our information goes, because I think we've become a little jaded in the United States. And so when we go over to other countries, they are really interested in what we have to say. So, I want to ask you, though, because I know you do all these things. So you are the real epitome of living regret-free. So tell us about your own experience with doing that.
Wow. I started actually taking charge of my own personal growth back in the 1970s. I was raised, I was raised to be ordinary. My dad was a great guy. He was a telephone repairman and a major in the National Guard, Army National Guard. My mom was a housewife. We had my little sister and me at home, and then my invalid grandfather in the front room. He had been disabled completely by a stroke, couldn't move for like 7 years, and my grandmother helped take care of him. And I grew up in a very normal Ozzie and Harriet, if you go back that far, kind of a American lifestyle, suburban neighborhood. Knew all the kids in the neighborhood, played in the backyard together, and walked to school a few blocks away. So there wasn't any of this 3 miles uphill both ways in a blinding snowstorm stuff that you hear people from my parents' generation talk about. So I thought I would be an ordinary person, and pretty much that was working. I was overweight, out of shape, smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, had never distinguished myself as a student or an athlete or anything, didn't have any money in the bank. I found myself newly married with a baby at home, and and working at a job that I didn't like. I was a clerk in a government agency making $500 a month. And I just, my life wasn't going anywhere. And I thought, well, there's got to be a better way. Then one day I heard Earl Nightingale on the radio and got inspired by what he said. What he said was, if you'd spend an extra hour each day studying your chosen field, within 5 years you could be a leading expert in that field. And I thought, wow, even ordinary me? And I did the math. An extra hour every day for 5 years, if you take weekends off, is 1,250 hours. Well, that would make you an expert on anything. So I decided to focus on the field of personal development since I knew nothing about it, but I was excited by it. And sure enough, within 5 years, I was working full time in that field. And today I've done virtually everything that people in that field ever set as a goal.
Well, now, you say that living fully is our job. Why do you say that?
Well, if you look at, and I've studied this on a number of different levels with experts in various fields. If you look at life in general, and I'm just talking about biology, life, any life form has an implied goal of living. In other words, it's a single cell's job to live as a single cell and do whatever a single cell does. It's also a dog's job or a person's job, I think, genetically, and this is not philosophical at all, this is just scientific, to do as full a job of living as you can. Well, if you switch from biology to psychology or even philosophy, and you look at life, why does life exist? Well, an obvious no-brainer answer to that is to live fully. In other words, if you're a small plant, maybe being a big, flourishing, abundant plant is what you ought to take as your job because that's what you were designed for. Well, same thing for people. If you're really good at particular things, maybe cultivating those talents in a big way is a real smart idea for you. So I believe, and I've found lots of other people concur, that our job is to take all these possibilities within us and explore them and apply them. Because if Gail doesn't live fully, all the rest of us are cheated out of what you could have contributed. And if I don't live fully, the same is true in reverse.
Well, that's so true, and people, I laugh because you said one of the things you talk about is being 68, and most people saying, you should be winding down, but, you call it rebooming. And of
Yeah.
course, here I am, 77, and I'm starting out on a whole new path and doing a lot. In fact, I'm going to be starting my own network here in 2 months. So tell us what rebooming is.
Well, if you think about the baby boom, that the people born between 1946 and 1964, well, that's the year I was born and the year I graduated high school, respectively. So I am your stereotypical baby boomer. But I'm also a prototype for what baby boomers could do differently because I chose not to wind down and consider age 65 the beginning of retirement, but instead the beginning of a whole new economic boom, a whole new social boom, life boom, just rebooming. And I even started playing rock and roll in nightclubs with my wife. She sings and I play guitar and we sing together. And as a matter of fact, last week in China, I performed in a nightclub alone, just got up and played rock and roll on guitar. And in another seminar, I pulled out a guitar and did a couple of numbers just sitting on a stool and playing acoustic guitar for the crowd. So I'm revitalizing all of those things that I had once done and gotten so much joy from. And I think everybody ought to do that. So we named our singing, our band, so to speak. I've got friends that perform with us from time to time. We named the band Resume the Boom. And we're performing tonight at 6 o'clock in Oak Park, California. Bring your friends. We're at the Bean Scene.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I have heard you play rock and roll. I've heard some of the songs that you've composed, and I'm sure people ask you, isn't your speaking career enough?
What a great question. Enough for what? Um, no, it's certainly not. It'd be like somebody saying, I work at the factory and that's enough, meaning the rest of their life is just marking time until they can get back to the factory. Uh, I find my speaking career enormously fulfilling. To be able to help people grow, to be able to collaborate with people on great strategies for being more successful or living more fully, and that's a heck of a privilege. Um, but man, that's just the textbook. You also need to apply the lessons. And so yesterday morning, I was up at 6 something a.m. hiking mountain trails with a bunch of my friends.
Well,
And
yeah, you got something called the Heartbreak Hiking Fools. What is that?
well, that's a group that's very appropriately named. Uh, we are a bunch of people over 40, some of us even in their 80s, who go out 3 days a week to uh, do a 3 mile one way mountain hike to the top of a local mountain. We live in the Santa Monica Mountains, just over the hill from Malibu, north of LA. And so the Heartbreak Hiking Fools started out as just a handful of people that would get together and hike on Wednesdays and Sundays, and then we decided to throw in Fridays, and then we started getting together on Tuesdays, and now then we've got 60 people in the group, and our signature trail is called Heartbreak because it's a particularly painful trail, and it really taxes all your ability to get up it. And we go 3 miles one way, which is usually 45 to 60 minutes, depending on your fitness, and it's pretty steep. It goes like 1,500 feet of rise over that 3 miles, and then we turn around and come back and go to coffee and tell lies, and just have a lot of laughs.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, now I know that you talk about the acorn principle,
Yep.
and it's very interesting because I've heard you do that. Tell us what that's about.
Well, an acorn is the seed, obviously, of an oak tree, but inside each person there is a seed of sorts that is who you are capable of being. In other words, you have certain potential, I have certain potential, and though similar, they're different. And um, what a lot of people do that's just, I think, sad is they don't take time to discover their acorn, the potential that's in them, and so they just listen to other people as to what they should do with their life. It's like a acorn gets coaching, and the coach says to the acorn, I've been studying you, and I think you've got potential. I think you could be a giant redwood. And if you go to Redwood Camp, buy this book on redwood skills and hang out with redwoods and find out what their secrets are, then you could be one of the great redwoods of all time. Well, obviously, the acorn's going to come back frustrated and depressed because acorns can't be redwoods. But they could have been a really impressive oak if they'd been focusing on that. So I think we ought to figure out what kind of seed is in us. And I knew for sure that when I was very young, performing was a big deal to me. I got such a kick out of it. It wasn't about being important or about me being a big deal, bigger than other people. It's just that I love to perform. And so I was naturally drawn to musical performance, and I did that back in my 20s and then didn't do it for many years. But I picked up speaking and started doing speaking and training, which put me on a platform and it gave me an opportunity to perform. And now here I am, 68 years old, and can't wait to get on the platform again in a couple of days in Toronto.
Well, it is true. I say that I started out as a singer and a dancer, and then I went into business and I got very businesslike and lectured all over on leadership and team building and things like that. And
Yep,
now I'm back with media and I'm back to my roots. And so it's really interesting how we come full circle and kind of start all over again. But
that's
you
called
have a,
rebooming,
you,
Gail.
pardon?
That's called rebooming.
Yeah, that is rebooming. It's true. That's true. And you have another book that's coming out this year called Success Velocity.
Hmm.
Now, I don't think I've heard you talk about that.
Well, velocity is a term that we typically think of related to a moving object, like